Yeah, here we go now, baby. Right back into the action for another day of the week. Welcome to the Wednesday edition of Before You Bet, airing live right now on the Cover's YouTube and X channels. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you smash that like and subscribe button. Right down there, a lot of great content here on the Cover's YouTube channel. I interviewed George St. Pierre, UFC legend. You might have heard of him yesterday. That video is going to go up this afternoon, breaking down UFC 309 this weekend and the Jake Paul-Mike Tyson boxing match. But on today's show of Before You Bet, we got a big one for you. John Middlekauff will be by here in a matter of seconds, breaking down all the biggest storylines in the NFL, get some of his best bets for the week ahead. Then Jon Metler will be here in the second half of the show, running hot in the NBA, up over 7 units to start the season. So we will try to get that going, to keep that going. So here's how my day started. You ever do something so clumsy, so stupid, that you just can't help but laugh at yourself? So I have one of these fridges in my house. They're pretty common, where you have the freezer on the bottom where you pull it out. So I've done the stupid thing before where I overfill the freezer and it sticks a little bit. And I haven't learned my lesson. So I do a thing in the morning. I make my smoothie, put it in the cup, and I like to put it in the freezer because I have my coffee first. And by the time I take it out, it's still cold, blah, 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 blah. I put it in there and it gets stuck. I'm pulling the thing, click, 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 and won't open. So like a complete asshole, like a complete dummy, I pull with all my might, snap! The handle snaps right off of the thing. I fall right back. So now I've got a broken handle on the fridge, a gigantic eyesore. My wife laughed her head off at me. Now we might have to buy a new fridge. Black Friday, right around the corner. Okay, let's talk some football. Let's go to our guy, Jon Middlekauff, down in Arizona. You ever do something so stupid you just have to laugh at yourself here, John? I got a gigantic eyesore of a fridge now in my kitchen.
Yeah, I do it every day. I mean, it's what I bring to the table in the house. So, I mean, it's not shocking at all. So you didn't have your smoothie then? Your smoothie's just in there.
No, my wife, she's
pried it open.
Petite gal, so she was able to get her hand in there and wiggle her out. But pretty big eyesore.
I heard you mention the Mike Tyson, Jake Paul. I remember Tyson got hurt, whatever. So is it this weekend? Is that what's happening?
Mike Tyson, 58 years old. My prediction is that the fight's going to go to decision. I bet that at plus 175, kind of based on the idea that it's going to be a glorified sparring.
Well, how many rounds?
It's 8 rounds or 2 minutes long. It's a really bad look if Jake Paul viciously knocks out a 58-year-old Mike Tyson who has medical issues. I think it's going to be a spar.
I do think early on, right, if Tyson gets one cold cock in, couldn't he take him out? I mean, it's kind of like a football player. Dan Marino at your guy at Monday Night Football. If you just handed him a ball and he took off his sports coat, Dan Marino could still sling it. The health and everything. There's no doubt in my mind. Tyson still has the power, not for long, but 1 or 2 shots early in the round. That'd be pretty legendary. Because remember he fought, was it Roy Jones a couple years ago? I thought he actually looked pretty good.
Yeah. He looked pretty good. I'm just wondering, I don't think it's fixed by any means. People throw that term out there way too often with betting and stuff like that. But maybe there's a gentleman's agreement where they're not going to go all
What can you get Mike with a knockout? Like 8-1, 10-1?
I think it's probably around 5-1, 6-1. I haven't looked at that, but I think Paul by decision might be the way to go. But I just played it a little bit safer. You can go over 5.5 as well. I think that's a little bit of plus money there. So some breaking news out of the NFL here this morning, John. Let's get an instant reaction from you. A bit surprising. Anthony Richardson back in at quarterback for the Colts. And it's kind of surprising with the Colts still being in the mix here for the playoff. Richardson seemed to be getting worse as he was going. Last time out against the Texans on October 27th, he completed 10 of 32 passes. And we all know what happened. He took himself out of the game. So your thoughts on the Colts going back to Richardson here?
Well, I talked about this on the podcast yesterday. If you're going to take a huge swing on a project, which I'm all for. I mean, because if it does come to fruition and works out, you've got yourself a superstar. Ask the Bills. I think are the best example. Mahomes, I think gets lumped in there. He was a much better college prospect than Josh Allen. Josh Allen was probably much closer to Anthony Richardson, raw, physical freak. But Josh Allen's a good example. He got to go to a team that wasn't supposed to win and didn't have the pressure. Anthony Richardson, they shoved him in like, we're trying to make the playoffs here, right? And the 49ers did it with Trey Lance as well. but it didn't last long. And then they inserted other guys and kept winning. The problem with inserting Flacco, which I understood when they did it because he taps out, he's not playing well. You do have to win. I mean, last year, part of the hype with Flacco is he led the Browns to the playoffs. And every time, you got 10 games going on at once, the Bills-Colts game was pretty ugly for a while. I mean, it definitely wasn't Josh Allen's finest moment. You got Flacco throwing picks left and right. And if he's going to do that, if you're going to lose, you might as well lose with Anthony Richardson. And you can look at your team and go, we've gave the old, trusty vet a couple games. He got his shot to try to keep us going. We can all acknowledge, it's not like he's playing that well. So it almost had to happen, because if you're going to lose games with Flacco at this point in time, there's no point. You might as well just play Anthony Richardson. And at least, because this offseason, let's say Anthony Richardson gets inserted and he keeps looking like he does, and they end up 7-10. They can't just roll into next season with Anthony Richardson as their starter like they did this year, right? I mean, you'd have to have hard conversations about just the future. And part of the way this world works now with the NFL, because of how much money they have, teams move on really fast. When we were kids, Anthony Richardson would get 3.5 years, 4 years, right?
Yeah.
You would just kind of, do you agree? If he just keeps looking horrendous, that's a major talking point in February and March and April. What are the Colts going to do with their, it's not like they'd cut him, but they would probably be more aggressive. If Derek Carr got cut, or, I'm just throwing out names, bringing a guy in open competition, that would be on the table, I think.
Yeah, there's not as much patience with these young guys, and especially, he's had the injury issues as well. And, he only played, 13 games at Florida?
Yeah, I think he was hurt. I was talking to a scouting buddy. He was hurt in high school. I mean, this guy has not played much football.
Okay, so big picture look around the league. There's a lot of bad teams here in the NFL. We have 11 teams that have 3 wins or less. So I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking, what the hell is going on here? And we get to a point, it seems like every season where the product has never been worse. It seems like people are saying that every season. I don't really agree with that. There was a lot of good games last week as well. But I think it's pretty easy if you spend some time looking at every team. You can easily get to 10 teams who are either probably unsatisfied with their head coaching position or flat out ready to make a change. So I'm wondering, do you think the NFL has a head coaching problem right now?
I feel like the coaching in the NFL, in major college football, for most of my life, there have been excellent elite guys, and there have been kind of middle of the road guys, and there have always been a lot of bad guys. I mean, we've always cycled through them. I also think some guys that are losing right now, I don't view, Bill Belichick lost last year. Vrabel lost last year. I don't view them as bad coaches. Even Brian Daboll, I don't view him like I do Eberflus, but his roster sucks. And anyone at this point in time would lose with Daniel Jones. I think one thing that has hurt the NFL, because one argument is, it's never been easier to play quarterback because you can throw over the middle, you can throw hospital balls, you can't kill anybody. But the offensive line play in the NFL, you could argue, has never been worse. And that's a reflection of college football, the offenses in which they run on Saturdays. Because Parcells used to talk about this in the 90s and 2000s. We don't dictate the players in the league. We just pick from what college gives us. And I think, Monday night's a pretty good example. The offensive line play is just not very good. It's is McVay a bad, they've been struggling to score touchdowns, right? If you remove overtime, the last 2 weeks, the Rams, with a healthy wide receiver core, Stafford's healthy, their running back's healthy, and Sean McVay, they scored 1 touchdown because one of the they scored 2 regular season or touchdowns in regulation against Seattle. One was a pick 6. So I was thinking when they were just settling for field goals and not really moving, it's what's going on with this offense? Well, every other play, Stafford's under duress, and it's sneaky. Not even just the tackles, it's the guard and center play is really bad. And, I think there are more good defensive tackles than ever. But even Tua, he was getting hit and fumbling. It's just, you just watch these quarterbacks. I think a lot of it is I can hold the ball a little bit longer than I could in the 90s because, guys will eventually get open. There's no Ronnie Lott and John Lynch going to kill my guy? So I think it's all these different variables because I'm not as hyperbolic. The game's never been worse. More people have watched football now by a mile than ever have. It's by far the most popular sport in America. There's honestly not a close second. There's really just one B, and that's essentially college football, which is also football. And everything else, I mean, these NBA games get like, and listen, I watched the Klay Thompson return. It was cool, but I would imagine like 1 million people watch the game, where an awful NFL game is like 13 million. So you get on social media, everyone's complaining, which I understand because sometimes I complain too, but that's all it is, complaining while you're still watching the game. You know, people complain about baseball and basketball and they don't watch. Mm-hmm. So it's not, I don't really know how to fix it. I don't know if there is a fix. The offensive line play is just, I think as big of a factor as like these coaches being bad, because we've always had bad coaches.
Speaking of being bad, got to get your opinion on
you went viral on this one.
You saw that?
I saw that. Yeah, I saw it like 50 different places.
Yeah, a bunch of people picked that up. A lot of name calling on social media. Some of it directed at me. You
got name called for that?
Well, you know how people are on social media,
comments,
making fun and whatnot. And, there's some gray area with that story in terms of if Williams, it was his people essentially who inquired.
There's no gray area. That it was something they asked for. Like did it come out of his mouth? No, I mean it's his operation. I mean it's like I don't think you're right. It's just comments on Twitter or whatever. Who really cares? But that's a factual story for sure.
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff with Caleb Williams coming back to haunt them, pretty easy to make fun of here, telling the new punter, hey, you're not going to be working a whole lot apparently. But how concerning is the play of Caleb Williams considering how hyped up he was coming out of college? You know, we were told this was the second coming of Patrick Mahomes. He got off to a rough start, then had a couple good games. The last 3 games have been really bad, but is it concerning, or do we give him a pass because, yes, he is a rookie, and yes, the coaching has been pretty bad as well?
I was thinking about this, actually, because I knew we were going to talk about this in the shower a little bit earlier. I mean, yeah, I'm sick, I know. But I was – if you were listening to a podcaster or someone, just like you had someone you were listening to, and their audio quality was bad, someone calling in to a radio show and their connection's bad, but you're like, God, I really like this guy. You know, usually your talent, even when you are in a disastrous situation, whether in our business would be, our equipment or whatever, in his situation is the offensive play calling, the coaching, the organization, you would still walk away. It's like, God, shitty situation, but I see something. He just got beat and looked awful. I think they had one drive over like 20 yards. I mean, they were getting the ball like the 50-yard line and couldn't sniff a touchdown, let alone scores. So you watch the Patriots, who I think we all kind of make fun of too. Like, do they have a coaching staff? Do they know what they're doing? Like, what the hell's going on there? And you came away like, yeah, Drake May was pretty impressive. Doesn't mean he's going to be a good player. Doesn't mean you're going to be able to go to the playoffs with him one day. But for a rookie, you just go, yeah, I see some stuff. I get it. I understand why he's a top 5 pick. You watch Caleb, who has much more talent around him, and you go, what is this? Like, we've all watched enough football at this point in time in our lives to kind of know, like, this doesn't get any worse than this. And it's always so easy to blame the play caller. And listen, they deserve a lot of blame. But when the story broke yesterday from someone that covers the Bears or a radio station that said, part of this, because it was weird when the play caller, why wouldn't he get fired on Monday morning? I mean, they played the kickoff Chicago time was at noon. So the game ends at 3. You have the rest of the day. You game plan all Monday. Why would you fire him on Tuesday? So it's a little weird. So then the story comes out that all the players are going to the head coach and the GM like, we got to fire this guy. And some of these guys are going, we want Tyson, which if I would have told you that at the beginning of the season, you'd been like, that's insane. But then you start thinking about it. Tyson's actually one of the more incredible stories in the history of the league, right? Division like 15 quarterback, first time ever to start as a rookie. And you watched him last year, you're like, I can't believe how good this guy is relative to where he came from. And then in Hard Knocks, remember Ryan Poles was college teammates with Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan came to hang out and was watching tape with them of practice, was like, this guy's gotten a lot better. Well, who do you think told him that? It probably wasn't the center. It's clearly DJ Moore, who they gave one of the biggest contracts in the history of the organization to doesn't think Caleb can play. And it's not like this isn't personal. Wide receivers, it's very cut and dry with them. It's very black and white. Get me the ball. Even like the highest character, no divas, are still a little divas because they need the pill. And this guy cannot get him the ball. So when I see, you think it's like the right tackle telling Ryan Poles and Eberflus to put in the back? Of course not. It's the skill guys. Why? Because their numbers look atrocious playing quarterback with this guy. And obviously DJ was, pounding the table for Fields. And the knock on Fields was like, he holds the ball too long, doesn't see anything. Well, that's this guy's problem. All I ever heard, and I mean, I watched this guy a ton at USC, like this great playmaker. And listen, has he lost his confidence? Of course. But it's just, do we expect to see anything different over? Did you see the breakdown of their schedule over the rest of the season? It is by
divisional matchups.
But the strength of schedule with all the records, because their division's so good, the Niners, it's like well over 700. The next closest team is like a shade over 500. I mean, they have the toughest schedule by a mile in the NFL. And they got this quarterback playing like this. I mean, they just played the Patriots, who I would say a couple weeks ago, most people would have been like, yeah, they'll probably draft one, right? I mean, that they kicked their ass.
Yeah, rough scene in Chicago. So someone who is looking good, Ja'Marr Chase. So I'm watching Thursday Night Football last week. He goes off for 264 yards. He leads the NFL in receiving yards, leads the NFL in touchdown catches. And I think back to the offseason, he's trying to get more money out of the Bengals. The Bengals didn't want to give it to him. Looks like the price is going up here based on the season Chase is having. So I'm wondering, is there a potential that the Bengals go the A.J. Brown route with him? You remember Brown was on the Titans. They didn't want to pay him. He gets traded to the Eagles. Is there a chance that Chase ends up on another team here?
If they would even entertain trading him, Joe Burrow should immediately demand a trade. That would be insane. I don't really have a huge issue. It was after his third year. He's making like $4.5 million this year. You're going to have to pay him an astronomical amount of money. So like, okay, you pay him $100 million this year, $110 next year to get a $4.5 million player. And it's not like clearly this motivated him. I mean, he looks incredible. I was asked the other day on the podcast, like, do you think there's that big of a gap between Jefferson and Chase? Because I'm guilty of this too. I just say Justin Jefferson's the best wide receiver in the NFL. And I think, just most people, because route running always translates, he's longer, but Chase has like this physical element. He's like the steroid version of like if you just combine DJ Moore and Deebo Samuel. He's so physical. He like turns into a running back when the ball's in his hands. I think he's a pretty good route runner as well. And he has this ability after the catch to just turn into like Tyreek Hill. I mean, he plays so fast. He's a really, really special player. And obviously he's the quarterback's guy. So I think you never know with the Bengals. But I mean, the only bright thing they got going for him right now has really been the quarterback and him, right? Yeah. So as now, the example you used of trading AJ Brown, if I remember correctly, that was like pick 17. They traded him like straight up for pick 17. Like, I mean, obviously right on the draft night. I think Ja'Marr Chase would go for multiple ones. Don't you? I mean, AJ was a good player. I mean, obviously he's an awesome player, but he had been banged up a little bit, and there was, that was his value. I think that Bengals would hang up if you said pick 17 for Ja'Marr Chase, right?
Yeah, absolutely. He looks like he's, at minimum, he's the third best receiver. In fairness, like the Eagles, pick 17, I bet if you ask them now, they're like, that was a steal. We paid 50 cents on the dollar. We would have given them 17 and like 2 more 2s or something, right? Indeed. Okay, so let's talk Kansas City Chiefs. I have a question for you about them. They are, of course, undefeated going into Buffalo as a small underdog here this weekend. So coming off 2 straight Super Bowls, people talking about them potentially running the table, going undefeated. And do you think they give a shit about having an undefeated season? They've already won a couple Super Bowls. They look pretty good on the resume. You don't think they care?
I don't. I mean, I do think they care about like each individual game. They're desperately trying to win because championship culture. They're just one of the highest level operations we've seen in sports, right? I mean, the peak Warriors, the peak Patriots, I mean, they're a rare dynasty going on right now. I think if Andy Reid would choose, he would like to lose a game. I mean, he can go 15-2 and get the 1 seed. So, like, I don't think he would mind losing a couple games, right? Like, I don't think losing this Bills game would be that weird for him. You know, in terms of obviously they want to win it, but if you tell me they go on the road, lose, and they end up still getting the 1 seed, what a great way to just relock in the guys in the second round when they are hosting the Bills, right? Or in the AFC Championship when they're hosting the Bills. And I do believe they're going to lose one of these next 2 games. if they beat Buffalo, which would be really impressive. I expect. I don't know where you stand. I expect them to lose this weekend. You know, this means way more to Buffalo than it does Kansas City. Kansas City's been flirting with it. And even Andy said in the locker room after they blocked the kick, like, this is hard on the old man. Like, they are playing in these crazy games. I could see them laying one of the biggest eggs of all time against Carolina the following week. Because in what world, if they do get up for this game and go on the road to beat Buffalo, which on the pie chart of importance to win the game, like, this is a big game for Buffalo. Every time Buffalo plays them, it's now become bigger and bigger for the Bills than it is for the Chiefs. How could anyone in a Chiefs uniform, even the coaches, get focused the next week if they win this game and they're 10-0? How could you? That has, especially if that line's like plus 12 or something, has upset City. The Chiefs laying one of the biggest eggs in the history of the league, and no one, because they beat the Bills, and let's say the Ravens win this weekend. I mean, would the number 1 seed basically be locked up in the middle of November?
Yeah, they are due for a letdown spot. Absolutely. They haven't lost since Christmas to the Raiders, and they're going to get every team's best game too. They get the Chargers coming to town. They host the Texans later in the season. They go to Pittsburgh on Christmas. Then even if they do get through that, week 18, they are in Denver. You think they're going to play their starters in that game if they have the number 1 seed locked up? Probably
well, they
not.
did.
Right?
If I remember correctly, I guess they had to win last year, huh? Because they didn't have the number 1 seed. But we have seen, I think teams now consistently, you know, whether it's the 1 seed or the following, like, do not play guys. Like those days of the old school football, and Andy used to be that, is completely out the window. So if you can't budge your seeding, I think the Chiefs couldn't budge their seeding last year, right? And they punted on that week. So it's well around the league. The 49ers did it last year, and they had the bye. So it's just come down to the only thing that matters for the Chiefs, like at this point in time. Obviously, the seeding matters, but it's not, at the end of the day, not the biggest thing in the world. They just have to be healthy going into the playoffs, and they will be, no one's betting against them. Doesn't mean they're going to win it. Like, eventually, like, the Patriots lost a lot. You know, people forget that. Like, they won 6 and they went to 9 over 20 years. Well, divide 9 by 20. I mean, you're talking 45%. So, like, there's going to be one of these games, like in the divisional round, you just lose. And honestly, that adds to the legend of the dynasty over the course of time.
Okay, John, let's get into a couple best bets here. You went 2-1 last week. Had the 49ers been able to hit an extra field goal or not miss 3 field goals, you would have got the sweep for us. But
I knew early on, having a decent amount of money on that game, I was in trouble. It was one of those, like, this is
the vibes were off.
Like a Niners. Yeah, the vibes. This is not a Niner blowout game.
Indeed. Okay, so I don't even bother asking you about the New York Jets anymore. They're we've covered it all. They're so bad. They scored 6 points in Arizona last week, but we're going to talk about them a little bit here. So you will be fading them. You're going to stick with the Colts plus 3.5 with Richardson. Tell us, you probably don't need to do much convincing, but why are you fading the Jets here?
Well, I'll tell you this. Last week, I was down bad after a Saturday night LSU. I don't know why I bet against my guy DeBoer, who I've been a huge believer in, but I did LSU at home, so I was chasing, and I started battling back on Sunday morning, and then Sunday afternoon games came, and I said, well, the Cowboys have no shot against the Eagles. Cooper Rush. And I was like, wait, and I just looked at the Jets. So I put a decent amount, and I parlayed the 2 of them, and that was as chill of an afternoon watching the Jets, and I had the Jets sound on the big TV. The Cowboy game didn't even matter after halftime. That Jets team, said 1, 2, 3 Cancun. Sauce Gardner, their best player on defense, or, him or Quinnen Williams. Quinnen Williams still plays hard, but Sauce Gardner, that's having an elite corner, quote unquote. He looks terrible. He looks really, really bad. Their defense is atrocious. So Anthony Richardson, Joe Flacco, I think I would bet against this team probably, unless they were playing maybe the Giants or the Panthers, if that line, I wouldn't I just stay away. It's not like I'd put on the Jets, but I think 25 plus teams getting points against the Jets right now in the NFL is just an auto hammer. I mean, this team, Rodgers can't move. I mean, bro, Arizona is a cool story, and they're playing well. That is not like a 49ers, Eagles, or Lions roster. And they made the Jets look like a JV team. I mean, that was pretty embarrassing. And the Jets, all of a sudden, it's like Thursday night, mini bye. We got some momentum. We got to win a bunch of games. I've never bought into them, but it's crazy. I mean, that was – how could you take them seriously after that game? It just happened to the Bears, and everyone wrote them off. And then the Jets did the exact same thing. And honestly, I would say the Jets' performance in Arizona was even worse than the Bears.
Yeah, somehow the Jets keep getting worse. And their defense is literally one of the worst
bad
defenses in the NFL since they fired Saleh. Like statistically, EPA per play, whatever you want to look at, they're awful.
Well, and think about this. Like the one thing with the Jets over the last couple of years, like they were really physical. It was just they were good in every unit. Well, now teams can run on them, no problem. So the one thing Anthony Richardson brings to the table, even if he can't hit water from a boat, he can run around. And Jonathan Taylor, he's flown a little under the radar this year because the Colts, haven't been as good as people thought in terms of win-losses. But if you watch him play, he looks fantastic. Like if you put Jonathan Taylor on the Lions or the Packers, you'd be like, hey, he's one of the best running backs in the league. What are those two? What's the over-under yards of those two guys rushing against the Jets? To me, it's easily 150, right?
Oh, yeah. They're going to go off. You would expect a run-heavy game plan from the Colts.
You would expect, remember when Malik Willis got inserted for the Packers?
Yeah.
Against the Titans. He started those two games. Yeah. I would copy that game plan if I was Shane Steichen from LaFleur those couple games. Try to have less than 15 attempts, shove it down their throat.
Okay, next up, all underdogs this week from John. We'll save the best for the last. Titans, you're going to take them to cover +6. They're hosting the Vikings this weekend.
I think that's a lot of points for a quarterback who is a little iffy right now. And I've supported Sam Darnold, but listen, sometimes you go on the road against a bad team. This isn't college football. Just win and get out of there. But I know they were bad in the red zone, but the Jags defense is awful. Is not very good. And I just think this Titans defense actually has not been bad all season. They really have not. I mean, their quarterback play it just doesn't get any worse. If you just inserted a Kirk Cousins or something on this Titans team, they would be 4 or 5 wins. Now, they wouldn't be a playoff team or anything, but the dust would settle and they would have 7-ish wins. And you'd be like, that was a competitive team this year. That's how their defense is played. And I could see just a really, really low scoring game, 15-10 or something, and just make this thing ugly. And again, sometimes Sam Darnold's not one of those guys where it's like Josh Allen, bad game, he'll bounce right back, or Lamar Jackson or Mahomes. Who knows? What if he just has a bad month stretch, right? So that's just a lot of points. And I know their record. Sometimes I think people forget, Minnesota right now is 7-2. So you can be really bad. The rest of they could just kind of win one, lose one, and all of a sudden they're going to have 11 wins. That'd be 11-6 if they just go 4-4 down the stretch, which is a fantastic season with Sam Darnold. But they're going to drop some games here, and they almost did last week. So
yeah,
this is just a value play. It's a lot of points.
Okay, so a lot of good games this week. One of them, battle atop the AFC North. We have the Steelers +3 taking on the Ravens. You're going with the underdog here. So why do you expect the Steelers to give the Ravens a game here?
Well, as the gambling community knows, isn't this just the classic Tomlin spot? Dog at home. Coming off a game where I would say they were a little off. I mean, they weren't playing as well. I had them just money line in that game. I actually cashed out and just took my money back on that final drive, the play before Ertz, where I think they got kind of lucky. I thought you easily could have called the first down there.
Yeah.
But you go on the road. That's a good win. I mean, and I think, the Steelers, I don't want to say they were looking ahead because I think they took that game really seriously. This is just always a game where you're giving the Steelers 3 points at home. And the other thing is last year's Baltimore, this Baltimore's offense is clearly better than it was last year. If you would have put this Baltimore offense on last year's defense, honestly, they might have like ran the table. They might not have lost. They would have been unbeatable. But this defense is, and I get it's Jamar Chase. I think Jamar Chase almost had 500 yards in 2 games. This defense is atrocious against the pass. I mean, terrible. And the one thing the Steelers have now is like the passing game is somewhat explosive. Russell just throws it up to Pickens. Mike Williams, the game-winning touchdown. Like, they have great, like, those guys aren't 50-50 wide receivers. George Pickens, like an 80-20. Even Mike Williams, throughout his career, I wouldn't quite put him 80-20 anymore, but he's definitely not 50-50 because he's a big body, he can go up and get it. Now, their run game has been a huge part of, like, their offense, and that is the one thing the Baltimore still does well, is slow down the run. So it'll be interesting. Like, I don't know if Najee and Jalen are just going to run for like a $120 combined against these guys, which I think they need to do to open up the passing game, because they're not really built like the Bengals have no problem. We'll just drop back, throw it 45 times a game. Like, I don't think Tomlin wants to do that. So to me, it's on the Steelers defense to at least just corral these guys. Like, you're not going to hold them to 15 points, but can you hold them to like 23? Right. And give yourself, and at home, this place is going to be rocking. Tomlin's fired up. And again, like, this is just 3 points. Were you surprised to see that line, or is like Baltimore, like, this isn't 2023? Have people watched this defense?
I thought it would have been inside of 3 points here, considering
like 1.5
how bad
or something.
The Ravens, the Ravens have a little bit extra rest, I guess, coming into it. Tomlin as a dog at home. If you like betting teasers, Steelers should probably believe. There's a lot of good teaser spots this weekend. But yeah, Pittsburgh, their only losses this season have come by 3 points as well. So when they lose, they keep it tight, right?
Well, and let's face it, because the Ravens, they've had, obviously, I would say I think it's fair to say the biggest head-scratching loss so far of the year, that loss to the Raiders when they were up 10 points. The Browns divisional game, it's on the road, is not that crazy of a loss when you over the course of a season. But that Raider game comes into play pretty big, because if the Steelers win this game, they'd have 2 losses and the Ravens would have 4. So the Ravens would no longer even control their own destiny, right? Even if they beat the Steelers when they come back to Baltimore. So you could say in the pie chart of importance, it does lean a little bit to Baltimore. I mean, this would be obviously, we have a lot of football left, but you talk about what a massive win. We'd be talking like, God, the Steelers are probably going to win the division here, right?
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, not only win the division, depending on what happens in the Bills and the Chiefs game and the Bills the rest of the season, though the Bills division's pretty terrible. Like, you'd kind of be chasing the Pittsburgh and the Bills for the 2nd seed. So that's 2 home games. That's game 1, the 2 versus the 7, which, that 7 seed probably going to be like Denver or Indy or a team like that, right? So you're going to be a pretty big favorite. And then to get the Bills that following week as the 2-3 game is pretty massive, isn't it? I mean, that 2 seed, there's a big difference between the 2 and the 3 seed.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So,
also, the Chargers are probably going to be the 6 seed. And I'll tell you this, they are going to be a sexy underdog pick that wild card round, because it might be like Harbaugh +5 with that defense. It's like, could he win outright?
The offense is getting going a little bit too.
Herbert looks fantastic.
Okay, John, before you go, the people are dying to know, who do you have in the Grey Cup this weekend, Argos or Blue Bombers?
I'll go Blue Bombers.
Blue Bombers.
When
favored by around 9.5. So
when I was scouting, I used to do the CFL, and I went to the BC Lions. They had a guy, and I remember flying out there. It was the first time I had been to Whistler before, but I didn't stay in Vancouver, and just thinking like, God, this city's incredible. It was the team was pretty bad. The player was actually pretty good, but it's a fun league. The rules, when they get contracts, they can't just bounce. It's not like college football or whatever, so they have to stay for a couple of years. And a lot of guys have, when I grew up in Davis, California, so the big rival was Sac State. Ricky Ray, remember him? He's a legendary CFL quarterback who I think had like a 15-year career up there.
Yeah. 3-down football, baby. Okay. We'll see if John's Blue Bombers pick will come through for him here on Sunday. So, John, thanks again for joining. Best of luck with all your picks and all your content here this week, and we'll catch you again next Wednesday.
Yeah, looking for your viral tweet this week.
Let's go. We'll see who I can piss off. All right, buddy. Take her easy. Yeah, this tweets. Caleb Williams. A lot of people hopping on board, making fun. Some people taking shots at me. That's the way it goes here on social media. Okay, let's talk a little NBA Cup in-season tournament got going yesterday, so let's go to our guy. We're talking NBA. We're talking it with the ass man, Jon Metler. John, how we doing?
Good. The couple surprises in the NBA Cup. I think the NBA Cup is accomplishing, like, it's working for the NBA. I think it's accomplishing what they wanted it to accomplish, and it's bringing a different energy to these early games that it's kind of like shortening the season, right? It kind of bridges that gap to like Christmas, then football falls off and stuff like that. Yeah. I actually really love, I was kind of against last year. I love the different courts because I think it does signal like, hey, this game is different, right?
Yeah, so let's kick this around a little bit. Last night, things that stood out to me, Joel Embiid, he was pretty bad in his return. He limited minutes. I think he played around 25 minutes. He only scored 13 points. 8 of those came at the free throw line. He is 2 of 11 shooting. The Celtics lost again to the Atlanta Hawks. They lost to them twice at the end of last season as a big favorite. So that has pretty big implications here in the NBA Cup. So what kind of stood out to you last night amongst all the games?
Definitely the Celtics one. This is why I actually love the NBA Cup, because it creates these interesting scenarios where it starts to set up different betting angles for us based on what's happening. And the Celtics, they're not out of it. They can still go 3-1, get the point differential. But now you have this scenario where they might have to blow the doors off the next 3 teams they play, and they're going to play the point differential game. They have to. So like it's setting up this scenario, and they really struggled with this last year. I'd say from the betting, that they had a hard time pricing it in, where it's like, hey, this team needs to win by 17, otherwise it doesn't really matter. And they're trying to win by 17. Usually you have these spreads, and it's like, oh, they're favored by 12, but they're not trying to win by 12. You had multiple players last night. I know there's a video of Kyrie Irving I saw. Like, if we have a chance to blow someone out, we're going to. Point differential matters. I think Devin Booker also made a comment about like he wishes point differential always mattered. So then there wasn't like this, oh, we have to pull our starters, we can't run it up. So the players are talking about like, point differential. If we have the opportunity to kill someone, we're going to. I think the Celtics going 0-1 to the Hawks now sets up a scenario moving forward where, hey, their next 3 games, watch these spreads and watch their minutes for their player props and stuff like that, because if they want to win this, they're going to have to push for it, right?
Indeed. Yeah, I like the format of this thing. So good start to the NBA season for me. You did pretty good with your picks too yesterday, I believe, correct?
Yeah, 3-0 on the assists, 0-1, Mikal Bridges, lost by the hook. It's always disappointing because I think I came on here and said there's like 13.5 minus 130. At that juice, we may as well just play 14.5, and he lands on 14, which is always tough when that happens, but better play long term.
If you lose by a hook, it doesn't count. Okay, so 6 picks for us combined. Hopefully the return of the sweet boys here. You have a couple props. I have a couple of totals and a spread. Why don't you get us started here? Zach LaVine, what do you like for him tonight?
Yeah, Zach LaVine, over 3.5 assists, plus 114. So he had the injury, came back. He's played 2 games here. In those 2 games he's played, he's averaging 12.5 potential assists. And I went back and I watched the film on him because he had a game. I think he had 7 assists. I was just kind of curious what was happening there. And these assists, Zach LaVine is someone who not afraid to call his own number, right? He's never really met a shot he doesn't like. He kind of had comments at the end of last year where he was talking about, evolving his game, being a better teammate, things like that. There was multiple times in that game where you would, like, if you're 3-4 years ago, I was like, oh, he's definitely pulling that. And then he would stop and find someone else and they would like lay it in, or they would take the 3-pointer. He just looks like a much more willing passer to me. So at 3.5 plus 114, this really caught my eye. He's playing the Knicks. Towns, last year they have Hartenstein, Mitchell Robinson, really good defenders. Towns is not great in the middle. I saw a stat yesterday. I didn't double check it, but he's giving up a really, really high field goal percentage to opposing centers. And if Nikola Vucevic can finish around the rim, that always helps every Chicago Bulls convert their potential assists. I think the matchup with Towns, he should be able to. So I'm going LaVine over 3.5 assists.
LaVine, okay, my first spread bet. It's a big one. I'm going to take the Spurs to cover a big number. They're favored by 9.5 against the dinky Washington Wizards. We're going to take the Spurs to pick up the W. The lopsided losses for the Wizards. Oh, my God. Their average loss this season has come by 19.7 points. All 7 of their losses have come by at least 13 points. Their only wins this season have come against the Atlanta Hawks. They beat them twice. What's that say about the Atlanta Hawks, who beat the Celtics last night. Meanwhile, the Spurs are cleaning up at home here. Pretty good run at home. 3 double-digit wins in their last 4 games at home, including a win over the T-Wolves, who are a pretty good team. I think that's fair to say. So where does the edge come? Where does the big edge come? It comes on the defensive end of the floor. This is 7th versus 28th in defensive rating. Washington also 29th in offensive rating, so expect the Spurs to be able to shut them down. The Spurs, they're not a team who's in a position to play down to the competition by any means, and it's a great situation for them. They've been at home since Friday. They didn't play last night. They don't play tomorrow. They don't hit the road until Saturday. So, a lot of points aligned for the Spurs here tonight, so we'll take them to cover that big number. Next up, Jalen Brunson. What do we like?
Yeah, I'm just going to answer Derek here in the chat really quickly because he asked about Dyson Daniels, and we're talking about the Hawks Celtics there. Most improved 20-1. My only concern with Dyson Daniels, big game yesterday, but that came without Trae Young. So when Trae Young comes back in, obviously that offensive kind of falls off. I just don't think Dyson Daniels, he does really good things in a basketball game, not something that really a lot of it doesn't show up in a box score, which kind of concerns you for like a voting award. There's also like 10 guys probably in the running for MIP. So at this point, I'd watch him. I don't know if I'd bet it. Usually goes like he's jumped from like 5 to 15 points. He usually goes to the guy who jumps from 15 to 25. So he's kind of, it'd be maybe that next leap for him, maybe next or something, but definitely I got to keep an eye on for sure. Jalen Brunson over 26.5 points. So he's playing the Bulls. And when you look at this one, so the Bulls, very offensive lineup, right? Not really anyone on the perimeter they don't have a point of attack defender. You're Levine, Kobe White, Josh Giddey, all these guys. So when you're Jalen Brunson and you're running these pick and rolls with Karl-Anthony Towns and you're the guy who initially starts the offense, what's going to make you pass? Like if I'm Jalen Brunson, like what's going to, there's not a player on this team that's going to stop me. You know what I'm saying? So I just think and then once he gets going downhill, because he can finish around the rim, it's Nikola Vucevic protecting the rim. I just don't think the Bulls have someone who can stop Jalen Brunson. The one thing I did like, so it is the second night of the back-to-back, which is always a little bit concerning when you're talking about playing an over on a points prop, especially. But this edge came at like 34, 35 minutes, which not really that high for Jalen Brunson. So I don't need like Tom Thibodeau to push this to like 40 minutes. Could Jalen Brunson play 40? He definitely could. You never know with Tom Thibodeau. But I just really like the fact that there was an edge on this number, and it was about 34 minutes that you need from projection-wise. So I went Jalen Brunson over 26.5 points.
Okay, next up, let's go out to Portland T-Wolves. These teams playing 2 nights in a row. I really don't like it when the NBA does this, but I do think we have a good betting spot here. I'm going to go over 220.5 for this one, kind of just going with the trend here and some additional ammo to back it up. So the T-Wolves, second game of a back-to-back since the start of last season. When they're in the second game of a back-to-back, tends to be a lot of high-scoring games. They are 13-2 to the over in the second game of back-to-back since the start of last season. 2-0 in the spot this season. Minnesota's defense has been falling off on the road. They're allowing 11.3 more points per game on the road compared to at home. And you look at what these teams have done against each other this season. This is already their third matchup of the season. They went for 230 last night, 229 in a game earlier in the season. So I do expect them to go over 220.5 here tonight. Next up, Bradley Beal. What do we like for him?
Yeah, we're coming right back to him. So we bet him yesterday over 3.5, minus 115. Pleasantly surprised to see there was no adjustment, even though he had 4 dimes. It's 3.5 even money. You can grab it still. Really, it's just one of those things. So like yesterday, Towns, we bet 2.5 plus 140. He has 6, so he goes way over. And then today it's like 2.5 minus 160. Well, thankfully, Beal only got there by the hook. We had over 3.5. He only had 4, so he didn't really draw too much attention to this, which I love. I actually root for my players to just get over because it opens the door for potentially running it back. Again, another second night of a back-to-back, but he only played 29 minutes yesterday. That's not a lot of minutes for Bradley Beal. You could fully expect him to play the minutes you would expect from him tonight. You're playing against the Sacramento Kings too. They just lost to the Kings. They're in their division. It's an important game for the Suns. You're going to give me 3.5 at even money with Kevin Durant out and Bradley Beal, Devin Booker running the show. I'm taking it all day.
Okay, last but not least for me, I'm going to go over once again in Los Angeles. The Lakers playing host to the Grizzlies. The number set at 230.5 here. So when these teams get together, they put up a lot of points. They've reached 240 or more in 5 straight games against each other. They combined for 245 points in a game last week. Memphis bit by the injury bug once again early this season. So you might be thinking, well, Joe, how's Memphis going to score without Ja and Desmond Bain in the lineup? Well, they've been fine without those two guys. 7 players averaged double-digit points in the last 2 games without them. Jaren Jackson filling it up, going off for them. And the Lakers, they're a different team at home. They're 5-0 straight up and against the spread, but especially on the offensive end, they are number 1 in offensive rating on their home court, averaging 120.6 points per game. Expect them to bring the effort. They lost to Memphis there last week, so a bit of a revenge game situation for them. Their defense isn't very good. They're very good offensively, though, so we'll go over 230.5. And that's it. We have one NBA game tomorrow, but let's recap these ones. Spurs -9.5. T-Wolves, Trailblazers over 220.5. Grizzlies, Lakers over 230.5. John went with Levine over 3.5 assists. Brunson over 26.5 points. And Beal over 3.5 assists. Yeah, so looking ahead to the NBA schedule tomorrow, there's one game, Bucks Jazz, I believe. So I don't know if we're going to have an NBA segment on the show tomorrow. I will take a look at the game. If there's something I like, I will break it down and discuss it on the show, but I don't make bets just for the sake of betting them, especially when you have a one-game sample size. So we'll see what they come out with tomorrow. But that does it for the Wednesday edition of today's show. We got a great big one tomorrow. Really good looking Thursday night football game, potential for high scoring. That means a lot of overs on props potentially with the Eagles and Commanders getting after. Jake Butt's going to be here to discuss all the latest in college football, get some best bets from him as well. And maybe an NBA segment if those of you are thirsty for this big Jazz Bucks game tomorrow. Maybe we'll see what betting opportunities are there. So thank you to both Johns for joining me today. Thanks to Mick. Did a great job producing today. Thank you to BetMGM for sponsoring the show. And thank you to all the great viewers for tuning in today. Best of luck with your bets tonight, guys. And we will catch you again tomorrow. Go Dolphins!